Cool. All right, it's 6 o'clock, so we want to respect your time, so we're going to get going here. I'm just going to do a quick little introduction for Rob, and then we'll get started. You know, this whole process of drawing these boundaries, when I come into this building, I was a high school principal, for some of you know, for 20 years, and this building, when we talk about graduation and commencement, Williston as a proper school district, and I'm not talking 8 and 7 and 1, I'm saying as the first school that was put forth in Williston, the first class graduated in 1900. So that's why it's real easy when we do our commencement to say that it was the graduation of 2025 is actually the 125th commencement. So when you think about all the things that have happened in 125 years of education in Williston, right? This is kind of that next progression. And I would say becoming a Class A school, and I just don't mean that with the size of our population, but the things that encompass a Class A school, meaning top notch, right? And so this is that next progression of we have a growing community and we have these schools, and how does this all fit to try to get back to those neighborhood schools? So that's where Rob Schwartz comes in, and he is the CEO of RSP. And we have been working with Rob for 4 years, kind of right at the inception of the merger. And so he's the data guy, and he's done this numerous times. And so I'm just going to turn it over to Rob. So let's give it up for Mr. Rob Schwartz.
Thank you. I'll ask for you to clap at the end, and we'll see if you clap. Then we know it's a good boundary meeting. So, hey, again, Rob Schwartz, I'm glad to be here. I don't know if I need to move, so I'm in your video. Sorry about that. I've been coming up here for quite a bit of time. I remember when this boom started, and at the Hampton, it was over $500 for a night to stay at the Hampton, if you can believe that. We've done a lot of work with the county and then with the individual districts. Tonight, though, we're going to talk about what's being proposed. And I want you to understand that this is not a perfect plan, and you're going to hear me say a lot of things where your feedback is necessary to move this to the next level. And we'll talk about, again, this is not final. There's other meetings that will take place at the building level. We're doing some really big things, and those big things are going to require some additional, more intimate conversations at the school level. So you're going to get a lot more of this over the next month or so. But let me tell you a little bit about this process, because I think it's important to understand that it's just not a exercise that my team is going through to say, hey, we want to move your kid from here to over here. There's other things that are a part of how you get to getting the maps the way we're showing them with you this evening. And part of that is with this ACE concept. So we know there's academics, there's culture, and there's economics that are driving what happens in each of these buildings. They're important. We need to recognize that, but we also have to appreciate some of the changes that we need to do. That starts with what Jason was indicating with 125 years of being in existence. There's things that are different as we start into this 2025 era. We started out with a process, and there's many colors up here because the board was involved at certain points. Obviously, when they have to approve the boundaries, they're going to be more so involved there. The orange areas are where we have community input. And so the last time I was up here, we were out at Missouri Ridge, and we had just a few people that showed up, and that's expected when we're early on in the boundary process. As I mentioned, the district intends to have meetings at each of the elementary buildings so that you can talk about what these changes will mean to your building. The end goal is that sometime either in February or March, a decision is made so that plans can actually take place with what it means to go from K4 buildings to K5 buildings, creating these attendance boundaries and get everything associated for being able to deliver what the students need when the school year starts in 26, 27. We had guiding principles. So again, we wanted to start out with what are some of the things that are the big items, the sandbox that we get to work with in creating whatever these boundaries look like. And so here's a list of these different bullet points. And I wanted to pay attention to the last one, because this is going to be a challenge for us. And that last bullet point, let me just read it to you. The grandfathering student options will be a recommendation from the administration to the school board according to school board policy. This is going to come about based on whether there is space. And so we've already been having these conversations about what that could look like, and just being very transparent, it will be very difficult to almost impossible to have some sort of student options transfers for kids because of our space constraints. And I'll show you that with the data. We had some boundary criteria that we worked with the Board of Education to, again, start to give us an understanding of what could the boundaries look like, what is important to us. And so there's 9 boundary criteria that we went over with them. And we'll just go through the list. We had contiguous attendance areas, demographic considerations, duration of boundaries, fiscal considerations, capital costs, fiscal considerations, operational costs, neighborhoods intact, projected enrollment, building utilization, students impacted by the boundary change, and then transportation considerations. And I'll talk about some of these that are not on the list, but when we went with the board, they prioritized the top 3. And it was neighborhoods intact. So think about your apartment complex, your mobile home, your single family development, your duplex developments, all of them going as in unison to one building. Demographic considerations, trying to make sure that we just don't put certain demographics in one building. So the haves or the have-nots, or the way some students may be as learners, or the way they look. I'm trying to make sure that we have opportunities where what you see in one building would be similar in all of the other buildings. And then the third was projected enrollment building utilization. So again, we have a capacity of a building, and I'll talk about that. And then we have a number of kids that can actually go there based on that capacity. We also had a survey from the first outing back in October, and we had about 400 respondents, and all of this information will be made available. You can read through this, but this gets at where they associated themselves, what school building, and what their position was in the community. We wanted them to understand what were the guiding principles, what were the boundary criteria, what do they think? How does that align with what the Board of Education was thinking? We also had some things about ideally if we implemented the boundaries. That first one saying, hey, could we do something of phasing? And so that's something that we're now starting to talk about when we get into student options, grandfathering. Can we phase this in? And so that's where I'm saying it's a really thin line with the capacity that we have available. We had even like respondents where they typed in what they were thinking about some of the things they saw on those maps. And so I'm not going to read all of these. I just want you to get a sense that everything that we've been collecting is here for you to be able to review and understand that when you look at something on the map, some of it, a good portion of it probably came from what we were hearing from the community survey. We had some general themes that came out of that survey. Again, we had 400 people that responded. So we tried to categorize those to understand what were people thinking, and are we getting somewhere closer to what would be acceptable from going no boundaries to actually having boundaries. Overall, as I just kind of summarized the themes, it seemed that most people were in favor of and understood going to the K-5 elementary grades was going to be something that benefits the students at the elementary level, as well as assisting us with some of our capacity challenges when we get to the middle school level. So let's get into the concept. We really had 4 key elements that we were focusing on to create what we're showing you this evening. So we know that having K-5 boundaries for every elementary building. The second was with Slolan opening up in the 26-27 school year. So nothing happens until 26-27, right? So 25-26, doing the same thing that we've been doing here for the last couple years with the Missouri Ridge opening. We want to balance enrollment and demographics between the schools. and we'll show the data with the concepts so you can get a sense of that. And then we want to set the stage for future planning endeavors. What does that mean? Could be additions, could be another new elementary building. If you go back in time, originally one of the requests was to build 2 elementary buildings, not just one. And the reason for that was all the portables, right? So at the last meetings, and you've probably heard this in board meetings, a good portion of your kiddos are in portable spaces at some point of day throughout the system. So we started with the current enrollment. Again, we don't have boundaries other than Missouri Ridge, but we started to focus from last meeting on what operational capacity is. And so all of the buildings, there's a certain number of classrooms that coursework can take place. And so throughout the district, we have 2,860 available seats for elementary kiddos. Whatever the grade assignment is, it could be K4 or K5, but we're moving towards a K5 system. And then you can see our official enrollments was about 2,400 students. We get to one thing that changed from October to what we're presenting tonight is we did another enrollment analysis of the district, and enrollment grew more at the elementary level than what we were initially projecting a year ago. And so that made some changes in how we would be looking into the future with the number of elementary kids. I know it's really small up there, but you can see here in the 24-25 school year, we have with K-12 students about 5,300 students, just a little bit more than that. And you can see what that breakdown is by grade. I want to showcase this bottom portion of this slide because this is where we start to understand that the capacity that we have available and where we're going with our elementary enrollment, we have very little space, and that's using all of our space, portables included. So here we are at this roughly 2,700 mark of K-5 students, growing to 2,800 next year. This red dotted line represents our capacity that's available in the district. And when we have Solon coming online in 26, 27, that's why it jumps up. But you can see we're right at that capacity, even with the elementary building coming online, and that's using the portables. And that's even getting into conversations that when we look at the number of kids that will be in these buildings, as we start to dissect that a little bit more into the number of kids by each of the grades, do we have the right number of classrooms as we look at what our ideal class sizes are? So we're starting to get a little bit deeper into some of the nuances of how the school itself runs with the number of sections. Again, current demographics, you can come back to this table to say, okay, here's where it would be right now based on the way students are attending. This isn't based on geography, right? Because we're attending, we're making choices. We have one boundary right now, Missouri Ridge. So that's the one that's represented up here with the orange. You can see our district's much larger than that. Then this map was really one of the elements our team used to try to start back in October. So we know where people were making their choices to go to school. And so what we ended up doing is with those planning areas or neighborhoods where we had the majority of students in that area going to a elementary building, it got color-coded, a color that then represents the school. And so when we look at the darker green, that's going to be Lewis and Clark. Orange is Missouri Ridge, right? You can look through the legend and you can see where this is. So we see some natural pockets of areas around those buildings that are going to the buildings. So go back in time, and one of the things that the board members were concerned with is we want to have neighborhood schools. And so that means the closer you are to a building, the more likely you would be able to go to that building. Well, there's more to it than that. When we start to look at where the kids are, this is a heat map, and so where the red areas are, that's the densest number of elementary students. So when we look out right here by the high school around Hagen, we have a lot of kiddos, but we don't have enough facility space around here to be able to house all of those students in one building. And that's why we have a Missouri Ridge boundary when we made that Missouri Ridge boundary, and why when you look at the boundaries today, what we're proposing is going to have to carve this area up a little bit really into 3 chunks. All right, some of the revisions that we did from our October, again, I mentioned that the enrollment projections changed. So we have a different outlook for what happens with your elementary enrollments. And then we also solidified with each of the building principals what that functional capacity is for those buildings. And don't mistake yourself. I know we have some of the building principals here. We've talked about this in our admin meetings with them. All of the spaces are being used. So even when I'm showing that, hey, there could be some space there, it's being used for some sort of instruction. The way in which we have to use it moving forward is going to potentially be a little bit different. And so that's the conversations that we started to have with the admin team. So here's the map. I think as you guys came in, this was provided to you as 11 by 17. We have some larger maps when we break out to some smaller groups here in a moment that will give a little bit greater detail with some of the road names. But in general, when you look at this and then you start to look at what the choices have been for K4 in your district, we try to align them. But then we came into some challenges, and I'll kind of just jump into a few things that I want you to know. We're aware that this maybe is something that may look unusual, and like, how did you get to this particular point of showing this on a map? And so one of the things that we try to adhere to, that I would call an RSP truism, is I like compact areas, and I like things that are contingent or contiguous, so all connected. But where our kids are and where our buildings are in this district, much like a lot of the other districts we're working with, it just doesn't work out so nicely with where the buildings are, where the space is, and where everybody lives. And so that's where we start to get things where when you look at the pink area for Solon, where it's really connected at a intersection and it's not like just a nice little block by itself. This is also why when we start to look at some of the enrollments with, like, let's say Lewis and Clark, we have a northern area that's connected or not connected, it's an island from what's on the south side around Lewis and Clark. A lot of this gets back to, again, the enrollments and capacity. How can we fit this, and where are we seeing kids, and how many kids are generating, how some of these puzzle pieces start to fit together and maybe look better. Some conversation that could ensue. I'm going to give you a few more data points and then we'll have you guys working in small groups. But we could look at things that, is there a possibility that, let's say Solon goes further north, and then areas here on the south side, some of those apartment complexes, do they move over to Lewis and Clark if we're talking about geography? I'm giving you some ideas, not that I'm promoting one over what's on this map, but to give you an understanding that this is not final, and we want to hear what your thoughts are. Are there other things that visually are on this map, or things that you're experiencing with how you, as the experts that live in this community, move around the community to try to get your kids to the different schools? So that's the visual. The data behind this, we're basically, if remember I said 2,860 capacity. 3 years out, we're at capacity. Typically, when I talk about elementary capacity, I'm not thinking about this as 100%. We really want to be at 90%. And the reason we want to be at 90% is that gives us some opportunities that when a section breaks to need another section in the building, we actually have some classroom space to use that. And it also allows us to be able to use other spaces for support spaces. So let's say we need some things for emotional type situations in the classrooms. We have that space. Right now, we're very limited, and it's like closets and hallways and the principal's office, and that creates some challenges to be able to work with these kiddos. So again, we're limited on the capacity, and that's why we see this orange shading. Again, looking at this capacity, and as you move over, even with Lewis and Clark, you're like, well, it's not shaded orange. Well, it's a 286 building, and we have 285 kids there. It's a full building, right? If we start to look at these capacities, they also include the portables. We ideally want to remove the portables. Again, that's something that's been mentioned with the board. we're not going to be able to remove them. They're going to be in existence. And in fact, there may be some instances where we still need to add portables. If you can even imagine, we're building a brand new elementary building, we still may need portables, additional portables. The other thing that I wanted to circle back into with the data, we ideally want to keep as many students in the building that they currently are. But we have a couple things that are constricting us. One, we're going to 5th grade, so now we have another grade that's going to be in each building. And then 2, we have a limit on what our capacity is. And then 3rd, we're adding a new building into our inventory. So things have to change. It's how much of a change is acceptable by you as a community. So on this visual, when we're looking at the data, we're comparing K through 3rd graders to when they're going to be 2nd through 5th graders. And when we create this boundary, how many of these kids are actually in the boundary that they would be attending with this option and are actually attending that building already. So fast forwarding from K3 to them being 2 through 5th grade, basically 36% of the current population would be able to still be in the building that they're attending here in the 24-25 school year as an elementary kid, K3, becoming 2nd through 5th grade. So quite a bit of change. Ideally, we'd have that lower, but there's just things that we can't get around. Again, this is the same visual of the data when you want to look at the demographics, what's happening with free and reduced lunch, and how that may impact the services that happen in those buildings. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm basically done talking. I think there were some questions, and what I'm going to do is break us out into the small groups. You guys have 11 by 17 maps. And I'll come by with some of the larger maps. And I think I brought 5 of them up with me. So we can sprinkle those out. We're small enough here to talk. And then I want to circulate around, see what people are talking about. And then I'll kind of bring us back home with a recap of what's going to happen moving forward tonight, and then maybe start to address some of the things that you can expect with it not being final, how there could be some changes, and maybe some other things that people have been thinking about responding to up to the district. So let's have a breakout here and conversation, and I'll just kind of come around. If I can answer questions as I'm there, I'll answer them. I know we have district administrators, we got building administrators here. We could probably get a lot of the things that you may want to know about IEPs or transportation, those type of things. So let's break. All right, I'm going to bring you guys back. We went a little bit long. I had some good conversation for sure at each of the tables, but on this back corner. Here's where the next steps are on this. So I'm going to go to my slide of next steps. We're going to have meetings that are at the building level. But for tonight, what I want is if you wrote things on your sticky notes, I'll collect all those and I'll kind of transpose them onto a map myself. And some may be like, I have no idea where this is pointed to the map. If you give me like intersections, I'll be able to get to it too. But I want to try to take what we have for the people that were here in person and pull that into some of the conversation of where this goes. But I want to give you a flavor of some of the other questions that have been asked at this point. And a lot of them are going to be specific to, hey, I was in this particular attendance area, now I'm going somewhere else. So I'm going to read off a few of these questions, then I'm going to jump into the answer that I gave to the back corner that I think is really illustrative in how we want to communicate this out to everybody in the Williston community. But here's a flavor of some of these questions. And a lot of these were related to what had been submitted for why Missouri Ridge instead of Garden Valley, right? So some of these get into the pieces of where the kids are, how many of those kids are, and as we start to expand out and get into the nuances of transportation, but they got into things of like, how come housing that is extremely near Garden Valley is now going to Missouri Ridge? Well, what is extremely near may be different if I live out in the rural area than if I'm living in closer to town, right? So we'll get into some of those questions. We had like Windsong, Country Estates, Dakota Ridge Complex. So we'll start to build into what do the meanings of those mean by moving them to different buildings. One of the other questions that came up on here that I want to make sure is in the record was, will Garden Valley remain open and for how long? Well, I've demonstrated to you with the capacity, we need every space, whether it's a small building like Garden Valley or it will be a brand new building. So I don't see anything in the short term that changes this, and I haven't heard anything from administration that would say anything different. The other thing is, what people were talking about is, let's say as I go into the 26-27 school year and I'm a fourth grader and now I'm a fifth grader and I would have to go to a different building. That's going to be incredibly disruptive, and I wholeheartedly agree with that. So how can we work through some of those changes where a student may have just a 1-year change and then they're off to middle school? So we'll have more conversations about that. But I want to dig into what I really want communicated from all of you here is 3 things are dramatically changing when we go into the 26-27 school year. We have a brand new building, we have a grade configuration change, and then we're saying, based on what your address is, you're going to X building. That's not been done in the history that I know of here in Williston. And if it has, it's been a long time ago. So this is 3 things that are happening. And so there's a lot of change, and that change is creating why you may be familiar of, for instance, being in Wilkinson as a K4, but when we go to K5, we need to have core spaces serving 5th grade. So we have to serve a smaller area, but more kids because they're now K through 5. We're also even getting into some of the elements of our preschool programming, right? So the old district office will have 7 spaces for preschool. I think 3 for special education, 4 for regular preschoolers. We're still going to have the 3 other SPED pre-K programs out in the buildings, right? So trying to work through what are the needs of the students so that we have the right spaces. And that's kind of really the takeaway that I want you guys to have from this evening, as well as things that you put on these sticky notes and whatnot. They'll be there. And then you can scan this. If you've not taken enough surveys, this will take you out to a social pinpoint. This will be on the district website. I think we're having this open for at least all the way through January 26th. So almost 3.5 weeks. So that information, much like what I shared with you on the first survey, will start to play into anything we can change with what we've showed you this evening. Again, it's not final. There's more meetings that are going to happen at the building level. And I already gave you those top 3 things that are changing. So, Jason, anything more you want to say? Wrap it up.
Yeah, I mean,
All right.
this is a discussion. This
All right.
is a progression. So.
All right, thanks everyone for coming out, and make sure you put your notes down there and I'll take those in. Appreciate it, thank you.